Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. I'm your co-host, Thomas Vick, joined by my co-host, Seth Wilson. Seth, how's it going today?
Thomas, I'm doing great. I honestly cannot believe that we are this far through the month of July already. It seems like just yesterday we were talking about Independence Day, and now we're halfway through the month and looking at school starting in a few weeks. So
It's
time
wild.
is flying by,
Time is flying by for sure. July is pretty much over. School year getting started. And then when I think about you hit August, all kinds of stuff that you got to handle as you near the end of the year. In my practice, one of the things that I've got to do towards the end of the year, really in the fall, is the renewal of my malpractice insurance policy. And that's going to be the topic for today, malpractice insurance and how to fill out the forms and what kinds of things you need to be looking out for. So that's sort of what we want to talk about today. I remember when I was first starting out, I knew that I needed to get malpractice insurance before I got my very first client. It's so important that you have malpractice insurance prior to beginning any kind of representation for obvious reasons. You're a rookie, so you may be making mistakes along the way. You want to have some kind of protection in place so that if you make a mistake, you've got a way to take care of the problem. So I'll just kind of open it up to you about malpractice insurance and kind of what solo and small firm attorneys need to be thinking about.
It's a really interesting way to view sort of getting into the law practice. I always felt like the application was a helpful tool to understand what information you need to actually start a law firm. And so even if you go to the just very basic, what's the name of the firm and where's the coverage going to apply? And so choosing the name of the firm and those kind of things we've talked about a little bit, but your entity selection and all of those kind of things are really important for that policy to issue and cover the appropriate entity. And then there's things like tracking employee data, right? So you need to know if you have employees, what were their hire dates? Did they leave in the middle of the year? How many new staff members did you add? Obviously, that may not apply right away when you're starting out, but over time, if you add staff members, that's just another piece of the puzzle, so to speak, that you need to start tracking. And so I always felt like the malpractice application was really a good tool to utilize to figure out exactly what data, not just client data, that you need to track in and through your firm through that life cycle that we talked about.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about some of the reports that you can generate specifically in Clio and how that can help you to fill out the application. Maybe it's better off for the renewals, but that can be a good discussion that we'll have. And just thinking about when you're first doing that application for malpractice insurance, you're just kind of thinking, what areas of practice am I going to be in? I wasn't really sure what areas of practice I was going to be in when I filled it out for the first time back in October of 2014. I was going to take anything and everything that I could get, and so you got all these different areas of practice that you can select, and you got to say, well, this is the percentage of this area of practice that I'm going to devote my time to, and this is what I'm gonna. This is going to be my percentage for estate planning. This is going to be my percentage for divorce work, whatever the case might be. And that was really hard. And I talked to the insurance agent about, how am I going to decide this? And he basically said, well, just, kind of give your best guess. One thing I think that people should know is that malpractice insurance is actually fairly cheap when you're first coming out. It gets more expensive, along the way, but when you first get started, the insurance company knows that you're not going to have a whole lot of money. It's the attorneys that are, have been in practice for a while that are really kind of supplementing, from an actuary standpoint, what the younger attorneys are doing. From my perspective in opening up my law practice, I was kind of relieved to know that I'm actually going to be able to afford this for the first year, and I can proceed and not be too afraid of making mistakes and, you know, not having a way to pay for the mistakes that I made. That I think that is something to keep in mind. And also, kind of in establishing the law practice, this is just kind of an aside. I've kind of heard it said that if you don't really know how to do law practice coming out of law school, maybe just read the rules of professional responsibility, and that'll give you a good idea of what kind of systems you need to have in place, and that'll get you going. So that kind of is parallel with doing the malpractice insurance application. You got to really think through, how am I going to do this? One of the questions that is asked is, are you going to do engagement letters? Are you going to do disengagement letters? Are you going to do non-engagement letters? And, another thing that they ask for is letterhead. They want to see a copy of your letterhead. The memories are coming back to me right now. A letterhead. So you got to plan for a letterhead. And, these insurance companies it's not their first rodeo, so they kind of know what needs to be done. If you do those things, you're going to, be on the right road towards doing things that you otherwise should have been doing. So I like what you said there about, the choices that you're making with the insurance application really kind of help you get your practice started, along the way.
Yeah, and again, I think it just underscores that whole conversation that we just had was this is the checklist for opening a new practice. And the things that you're going to need are the things that the industry, if you will, have already established as norms. And so an engagement letter or a fee agreement, a referral agreement if you're going to refer cases to other people, certificates of insurance from other lawyers potentially if you need to provide those. And so the initial application can be a little overwhelming when you start because there's a lot of blanks to fill out and a lot of things, but try to take that high level view of the information that is being requested and use that as an audit for your existing systems or your existing plan and say, okay, what am I missing? Well, I need an engagement letter, so I better get that prepared. Or I need to create some letterhead. It doesn't have to be the final product. We talked a few episodes ago about a rebranding that your firm went through. So that can change over time. But again, if you're changing the name of the firm, remember, you've got to disclose that name to the insurance carrier. And so if you're going to change it, that's on your list of things to work through, check, and make sure that you've updated everybody in the protection chain, if you will, with that information. And so as you get into that process, I think the initial application, the best guess that you may have about the type of practice areas that you want to be engaged in are going to be just fine to get things started. You're not going to have a large client base yet that will increase that risk pool like you might after 3 or 4 years. And so as you're kind of getting started, it's a little easier to get in. But then as you're going, you're aware that the renewal is going to come up and there's going to be questions that you're going to need to respond to. So how are you going to get that information? And we talked a little bit, I think, in prior episodes about some of the options that are available for tracking case related information. And this isn't just names and addresses and contact information for the court and the parties and the other attorneys, but also the revenue generated by that case, value of the case. If we use an estate plan, for example, what are you planning for in terms of the estate value? It's not just the amount of the attorney fee, but the risk pool, right? So if you're dealing with $100,000 situation or $1 million situation, that has different levels of risk associated with it. Now, hopefully you're planning just as diligently for the 100,000 as you are for the million, but that's a different discussion, right? But you need to be able to pull that information back, because when you get to the end of the year and the renewal application comes to your email and you start filling it out, you go, oh man, now I got to go through every case that I just went through this year. And that means I got to go back to potentially July of the year before through July of this year. And so those kind of things, I think if you go, going in that you're going to need this kind of information, that's really helpful to get you prepared for that. So How do you track that, Thomas? And then I can kind of share what we do here at our office.
Well, I'm going to be learning from you. The way that I track my cases is by practice area in Clio, our law practice management program, which we talk about so much. And the way that that works out is, you organize practice areas, and then you can see how much in that practice area the revenue you generated from that practice area. So you can do it that way. You can break it down to practice area and then each particular matter within that practice area if you wanted to. And then that can you get your information from those reports, and then you compare it to, say estate planning was the first one, then what did you make in estate administration? What did you make in, family law? All that kind of stuff can be, compiled, and you want to kind of base your percentages off of, revenue generation. Maybe you've got, a bunch of cases in one practice area. Maybe you want to have, based on the number of cases, that might be a way of looking at it as well. Time on cases might be a way of breaking down the percentages. These are all kind of the options, I guess, of how to determine what your percentage of your practice is. So yeah, Clio reports is a great way of finding where you are in your practice areas. But as I just learned prior to this conversation, there are some inadequacies to the Clio reports, and so I'm here to listen to you and figure out how Clio can do a little bit better for us.
Yeah, well, so to clarify that discussion, we kind of started down the road of Clio's updates to their reporting recently. And I will note that on the renewal application that I've been working on, they actually ask us for who our law practice management software provider is. And so using one like Clio that's very widely known in the industry will give some level of both comfort and probably a little bit of a license to ask for more detailed information, because Clio's reporting is very widely known in terms of what types of data that it can track for a firm. And so I wouldn't be surprised in future years if insurance companies say, run this report for me, and that can be your exhibit A as part of your renewal process. And it will show exactly what we need to know, which will be very helpful for everyone. Or I suppose that'll probably all be AI generated at some point, right? Because that's more the administrative side. But in the custom reports, the issue I was kind of referring to for us is there always seems to be just a slight variation of the data that the application might be asking for. And so each year, I've now done this for a number of years, I noticed that the applications are asking for similar information in slightly different ways. And so either the insurance company has found a better way to ask the question to get more accurate results, or they keep changing it up so you can't just hit a button and prepare a report and get it out. You've got to actually look at and maneuver through and do some analysis of the data. And so what I do really like about Clio's report is you can get accurate information. The challenge or the development opportunity, I think, is being able to customize the presentation of that data that answers the question without the need to export the document to an Excel spreadsheet or something and kind of summarize things that way. Not that that's too difficult to do, but just eliminates that next step. And so the Clio custom reports that I think actually maybe within the last week just got released to everyone. I was on an early testing protocol with some of that, which was a lot of fun to kind of see what they were doing. But I actually built several custom reports specific to our practice areas and the reporting that we needed to do to respond to the renewal application. And so I was able to group those reports under a report area called compliance. It's one of the built-in drop downs that Clio has for you. And so I just kind of titled it based on what specific renewal thing I was replying to, and built the report to show me the data. And a couple big pieces of information that you will need is your year to date revenues and the last 12 months revenues typically. And so Clio knows that. And those are some of the report periods that you can actually select and remember. So you don't have to go in and manually put the dates in. When you run that report, it'll actually just go for the last 12 months. So really, by the time you run those reports, as long as you submit your application within a short period of time of running those reports, you're going to have pretty live, up-to-date data, which is pretty neat. So that's been a good thing. And the other side of that is those give you sort of your calculation numbers, right? So I need to know what my last 12 months of gross revenue was, and I need to know what my year-to-date gross revenue was. And then I can respond to the various practice area questions as a percentage of that total, typically. So one of the challenges I think lawyers face is when we have multiple practice areas, then you like to have some discrete data. So you may have multiple practice areas assigned to matters. Well, what if that's rolled up, if you will, and combined with other practice areas? Like, hey, I need to know on your family law cases that you handle, for example, how many of them were initial filing and opening the case, and how many of those were modifications of an existing case? Well, if you don't track those separately, that can be a little bit to untangle, and you kind of have to do some manual work to do that. Or vice versa. What if you wanted them combined as all family law? The custom reports in Clio are really helpful for that because you can combine practice areas in a report and utilize the multiple practice areas that are specific to the question you're trying to answer. And so, however, the insurance carrier has kind of grouped its practice areas, you're all set. So probably easier to talk about an example there where one of the supplements is estate, trust, and probate. And there's various practice areas that fall into an estate planning practice. So this includes probate administration, trust administration, litigation, guardianships, business formation, deeds. Well, if you do deeds, then you also have to do a real estate supplement, but that's a whole nother thing. So I was able to utilize the Clio custom report to go through and add each of those practice areas into one report and export that to Excel to do some summarization for what I needed. So very helpful process, much easier than it's been in the past to do that. So really, really excited about that development.
Yeah, one thing I love about the custom reports is that you're able to see the landscape of your law practice. You can kind of see, well, I've got this area of practice that is growing, and then maybe I need to put more attention into that, more fuel to the fire, so to speak. Or, maybe I'm a little bit deficient in this other area of practice, and maybe I need to not spend as much time on it. Maybe I need to get rid of it. It gives you a good viewpoint of where your practice is. And that's one thing I love about Clio is the reports and how you're able to kind of see where you're at any given time. Yeah, and anytime you got more information that is available to you, it's going to be more helpful to you in preparing these Medicaid or renewal applications, malpractice insurance. So I think that's great. And, I'm going to have to play around a little bit with these combining the practice areas within a report. That could be pretty useful to me.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm still working through is as I go through the application itself, I'm always looking at, was there a piece of information that I had to manually figure out this time that throughout the next year I can adjust how I'm collecting data or analyzing things, and that'll make life a lot easier when I have to fill this out next year. And so one of the best ways I found to do that is to utilize Clio's custom fields in the matter. And so what I will do, for example, on a personal injury case, which again, you have to factor in all the types of personal injuries that you may handle, including the different case types that may be there, like medical malpractice or what have you. And so if you just pull your personal injury report, you're not going to get all of the information that comes in that is responsive to that question. So you got to be aware of that as you work through as well, that, hey, this doesn't just, in my mind, include one particular practice area, just how I've done it. But anyway, on that particular practice area, you need to know the amount of settlements or verdicts that you got on a case. And a lot of times we can track the revenue we've received, right? Reimbursed expenses and attorney fees, but we don't necessarily track the amount of the settlement, especially if you don't do that as a large part of your practice area. So I added a custom field to collect that data so that when a case would resolve, we would put that amount in as a custom field. So at the very least, all I had to do was filter by a particular practice area, and I can see that on the Matter screen, or I can actually export that outside into an Excel spreadsheet to add it up very quickly. So that's one that's super helpful. The other one is estate value. And so a lot of times, again, insurance companies are trying to figure out what their exposure is. And so they want to know kind of what is the amount of assets you are responsible for when you're doing planning or administering an estate. So I will put in estimated gross estate value as a custom field, and that's going to be much more accurate than me kind of trying to remember 12 months worth of cases and or going back to all the closing statements and pulling the inventories and doing all those kinds of things. So that's just a helpful way that when I close my case out, I have that on a checklist to say, make sure we've added this information and tried to say, this will be the document that you get that from. That's the settlement agreement, the order, or the closing statement. That'll give you that evaluative information that you can put in then to that custom field.
I love how you put in these custom fields that help you track the value of the estate or the value of the settlement, so that you've got a historical record. That's one thing that you can do in Clio is add the custom field, track something that needs to be tracked, and then you can export it into the Excel spreadsheet, and then it's there for whatever use that you have it for. And that wouldn't be the only reason why you have a custom field for a dollar amount. You might actually need that for a client letter or something like that. Lots of flexibility built into Clio.
Yeah. And we will talk, I'm sure, on a future episode of kind of utilizing those fields and that information in terms of document automation and that kind of thing. But what's interesting to me as I kind of watch Clio's development is the reporting capabilities that these custom reports allow are essentially letting me build the spreadsheets that I used to build with live Clio data. And I don't have to export it and do something. I can just go right to that and get an overview of the practice in ways I want to see it. And that's always been the tension for the Clio reports is they've prepared a report that you can run and you may be able to adjust certain things about it. But now with the custom things, you can really get in and dial in what you want to see and group it by different things. And I just got noticed that they're going to allow sorting by different column headers and how is that supposed to work. So they're seeking feedback from users to really make it a true one-stop shop for all of the information, which is really great because it's much better than tracking multiple spreadsheets or separate things, and that's what's great about sort of this cloud-based software as a service. It continues to get better and it continues to respond to the needs of those of us who are using it and putting it through its paces.
Good stuff, Seth. I think that your microphone was kind of fading in and out there the last 30 seconds or so, but I think we were able to hear you. Yeah, so I encourage people to check out custom reports on Clio, and as they're filling out malpractice insurance applications and renewals, take advantage of those. Use the tools that are available to you. Don't make it harder than it has to be. Use those tools. I think that'll do it for this episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, like this video, subscribe to the channel so that you can encourage other people to check us out and use us as a resource for attorneys that are trying to launch their own law firms. We're the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast, helping lawyers launch. Seth, any final remarks?
No, it's just like I said, it's great to be a part of the journey for folks, and hopefully some of the tips that we've learned in responding to these different applications can help you prepare for what you're getting ready to go through, maybe for the first time, or if you're coming up on that renewal, and making sure that everything is positioned as smoothly as it can be, because this is one of those areas nobody's paying you to get this stuff done, right? So you got to work on this, make it as efficient as possible, but then utilize that information. Don't see it as a waste of time, but just something that really can help inform where you are with your practice and kind of an audit of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Seth, and we'll talk to everybody later. Have a good
Thanks,
day.
Thomas. We'll see you.